Last week, somebody submitted a great comment that I wanted to respond to in this week's blog. They suggested that faith, instead of being intellectual assent, believing in a set of propositions, is more like trust. Trust in someone that grows through experiences of their trustworthiness. So is that what Christian faith is? Is it trust in someone, in Jesus, that grows through experiences of his trustworthiness? Well, yes and no. See, on one level, absolutely it is, because if Christian faith is all about a relationship with God through Christ, then it has to be grounded in trust. And as many Christians will attest, they have found Jesus to be eminently trustworthy. They will say that they are sure that he is real and that he is God because they've had experiences, powerful, profound experiences of his presence, answered prayer or encounters with him. There's just one problem with that. How do they know it's Jesus? See, every major religion has adherents, believers who would say the same thing. They would say that their God, however they define God, they know is real and trustworthy because they've had powerful, profound experiences of that God and that God's trustworthiness. See, if faith is simply about trust in someone that grows through experiences of their trustworthiness, there is no way to know who that someone is and if that someone even exists. But Christian faith didn't begin with trust. It didn't begin with faith. Christian faith began in the midst of rampant skepticism. Christian faith only began because of evidence that can turn ardent skeptics into passionate believers. See, unlike every other religion, other major religion, where at the time of the leader's death, faith in that leader was thriving, when Jesus died, no one believed in him. The best that anybody, especially the disciples, could believe that he was a self-deluded messianic pretender. With every other religion, faith in the leader, the founder, couldn't be any higher at the moment of their death. And there's a group of ardent followers ready to propagate the faith, whatever that leader had imparted to them, their teaching or revelation about God, propagate that to the world, to go out and tell the world. When Siddhartha Gautama dies, the Buddha, Buddhism is about to explode in Asia. When Muhammad dies, Islam has basically taken over virtually all of Arabia. But when Jesus dies, there's no one there to propagate the faith. The women go to the tomb to anoint a dead body. His male disciples are nowhere to be found. They've abandoned him in fear for their own lives. In fact, it would have been impossible for those first disciples to believe in him. It would have been impossible for them to believe that he was the Messiah. That the notion of a suffering Messiah, a Messiah who gets himself crucified, was a complete oxymoron, a complete contradiction in terms. It was as impossible as a square circle. In the wake of Jesus' death, there's no way the disciples could have ever believed that Jesus was the Messiah, let alone God's divine Son. A couple of years ago, my wife and I attended a service at a large Manhattan church. Towards the end of the service, they had communion. As we were sitting singing a contemplative song that was printed in the worship bulletin, they came around with a little wafer of bread and then the cup of grape juice. When everybody had their bread and juice, the pastor invited us all to stand so that we could consume it together, eat and drink together in communion. In front of us was a woman who had put her coat, this very expensive beige camel's hair coat, on the seat next to her, directly in line with my wife. When we stood up, as the pastor invited everybody to stand, my wife was trying to juggle her worship bulletin, the cup, and the morsel of bread, and she lost control of the cup of grape juice, which went flying all over this very expensive camel's hair beige coat, creating a huge purple stain. My wife shrieked. She said, "Oh, shoot." Or at least that's the censored version of what she said. And we both looked at each other, realizing that that coat was ruined and we were now going to have to buy this woman a brand new, very expensive beige camel's hair coat. When the service was over, we began apologizing to her profusely and were offering her our information so that we could replace her coat. But the woman couldn't have been more gracious. She said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's no big deal." It was a big deal. It's a very expensive coat. She said she refused to take our information. So my wife, in kind of a last-ditch effort to do something for her, pulled out a bottle of water that we had been drinking walking around Manhattan before the service. And she offered to put the water over the stain to see if it might dilute it a little bit, loosen it up. So if she did have it professionally cleaned, there was an outside shot, they might be able to get it out. So the woman said, "Sure, go ahead." My wife poured the water over the stain, and immediately the stain washed away. The three of us stood there stunned. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. The coat was as good as new. We would have never believed that stain could have come out, especially that easily, unless we had seen it for ourselves. The disciples are in a similar situation. There's no way after Jesus' death that they could ever believe that he was the Messiah, the Son of God, unless they had somehow seen evidence of that fact that they couldn't deny, unless they had seen him risen from the dead. See, they didn't believe in him because they had great faith, because even in the wake of his death, they still trusted in him. They believed in him. They believed what they thought was absolutely impossible beforehand, because they saw something that they couldn't deny. They saw something that enabled them to believe what they would have thought impossible otherwise. In fact, modern scholars who study the resurrection agree that this is part of the bedrock historical fact. There's a consensus among basically all the scholars who study the resurrection, who are experts in it, that the disciples believed, at least in their mind, that they had really seen Jesus risen from the dead. That's the only way you can account for the beginning of the church, how it ever got started, how it ever got off the ground, where Christian faith could have ever begun in the wake of Jesus' death. What some of those scholars dispute is whether the disciples actually saw Jesus really come back from the dead, or they were having some kind of psychological experience, phenomena. By the way, there is good evidence, plenty of evidence, to show that they really saw a tangible, embodied Jesus, but that's a subject for another blog. So, yes, Christian faith does involve trust, but Christianity began with evidence, and it continues to be grounded in evidence that was good enough to defy the rampant skepticism that occurred in the wake of Jesus' death. The disciples did not believe in Jesus, did not have faith in him because they simply trusted. They had faith in him because they saw something they thought impossible beforehand. They saw something that they could not deny. They saw him alive, back from the dead. If you would like to see more videos like this, please like the Raising Jesus Facebook page so we can keep you updated on future videos, blogs, and announcements. And I'd love to hear more comments from you. You can go to the Contact EJ page and leave your comments or questions there on the Raising Jesus website. I'd love to hear from you.